Chapter 8. Prnc ltfr. A combination and a form indeed, where every god did seem to set his seal, to give the world assurance of man. Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 4. The door opened, and the young man whom I had rescued from the sea entered the room. Even amid that terrible scene, as he lay senseless on the rock, I was struck with his appearance. Now I was highly impressed with his distinguished air and princely bearing. He was of tall stature, and his form a perfect model of manly beauty. His countenance was the most remarkable I had ever beheld in man. His features were exquisitely molded, their expression lofty, ingenuous, and engaging. His dark and beaming eyes were perfect mirrors of a pure and noble soul. Their expression was wonderful. A monarch would have coveted their look of imperial command. A despot would have sold his scepter for the magnetic power of that glance, which could detect a foe, unmask a hypocrite, or overawe a savage, and with it was a look of winning gentleness a queen might have envied. His lustrous purple-hued hair was tinged with a sheen of resplendent gold, and hung in heavy masses down his shoulders. He was clad in a close-fitting dark grey jacket and falling collar decorated with brilliant insignia, indicating his rank. Grey trousers and high boots reached to the knee. A ruby of resplendent luster, cut in the shape of a human heart and surrounded with a glimmering cluster of star-shaped diamonds and emeralds, was suspended on his breast. He wore a black-plumed chevalier hat and a short dark blue mantle over his shoulder. His whole appearance and bearing would have elicited the greatest admiration amongst the proudest courts of Europe. We all arose as he advanced with a quick and graceful step. "Altafora, Jugavraria, Thuvria, Basemis Madame Ultima," said the doctor, making the ceremonial introduction, which was translated by Asclepion. Altafora Raja Thurvia, Prince Royal of the Kingdom of Mandal Ultima. The eyes of the princess sparkled with animation, and his countenance was wreathed with a bright smile. He clasped my hand, placed it on his forehead, thence to his breast with a graceful gesture. "With what pleasure do I salute you, my preserver! Accept, I pray you, my sincere congratulations and my heartfelt wishes for your speedy restoration to health," which was translated by Asclepion. I responded to the prince's salutations in terms as polite as I could command. "His Highness has been a constant attendant at your bedside," said the doctor, "manifesting the greatest anxiety during your dangerous illness." "At the risk of his own life and after a desperate battle, he rescued me from the sea and the shark," the prince replied. Then, turning to me, his countenance glowing with gratitude, "Lieutenant Hamilton, to your intrepid courage and devotion I owe my life, not that I prize it so much for its own sake, but for the sake of my kindred and friends who love me. From what grief and despair you have saved them, and what a debt of gratitude we owe to you, that can never be repaid." "Honored Prince," I replied, "I beg you not to speak of obligations. I am only too proud to have been able to render you any service." "From this hour," continued he in tones of deep feeling, "you are knit to me in friendship's most sacred ties. Receive, I pray you, this slight token of my gratitude and esteem." And the prince, removing the jeweled ruby from his breast, placed it around my neck. Then, calling John, he pinned a splendid medal on his breast. "Wear this in behalf of my companions, whose lives you bravely rescued," he said, as the poor fellow, in the excess of his admiration and delight, dropped on one knee and kissed the hand of the prince. We sat down engaged in conversation, Asclepion interpreting. I gave a full narration of my voyage and the incidents connected with it. I also described the efforts of the former navigators to explore these inaccessible regions. "Enclosed within these icy barriers," said the prince, "our people have had no definite knowledge of the great world beyond. We have believed, however, that it is inhabited by great and populous nations, highly advanced in power and civilization. Your presence among us confirms it. Can you not favor us with a short description of your world?" I briefly described its countries, races, and nations, enlightened, civilized, and barbarous, the wealth, power, progress, and wonderful achievements of the dominant white races, the different forms of government, and wound up with an enthusiastic eulogium on my native land, the greatest and happiest republic on the face of the globe, to which all my audience listened with absorbing interest, expressing their astonishment at my recital. I then asked the doctor to explain the extraordinary phenomena connected with my rescue on the rocky ledge, the burning icebergs, and terrible explosions. "To tell you the truth," said I, "my comrades and I thought the end of the world was at hand." "We had a little fire ship cruising around this polar sea," he replied, "and the captain was instituting a few experiments in the way of destroying icebergs, etc." "Your mode of accomplishing it certainly wonderful and unknown to any other nation." I then described the mysterious sounds heard in the ice cavern and the breaking loose of our berg from its connection with the shore. "Our vessel was cutting a channel through a glacier at that point. As your berg floated down the current, it fortunately was not set on fire or blown up in common with the others. Had such an accident happened, we should not now be enjoying the pleasure of your company." "Very fortunate, otherwise we should have been blown to atoms or boiled alive. Please explain how we were saved from such a catastrophe, and how the 60-foot thick roof of our icy dungeon was split off over our heads as by the axe of a Norse god, as if by the axe of the Norse god Thor. As your berg rolled down the current, our ship fired its shell at it. That lucky shell did excellent service, tore off the roof, upset the berg, and threw us out on the rock in the nick of time. Pray inform me your object in cutting this channel." "To make a direct communication with the great open sea lying beyond to the north." "I fear you will find it impossible. Your channel, cut in the summer, will freeze up during the long winter, these great icy and rocky barriers extending in a circle of 10,000 miles around the pole and reaching nearly 1,500 miles beyond it." "We are aware of this. Still, we do not despair of finally overcoming these obstacles. The operation of our fire ship have been suspended for the present. When they are resumed, you have an opportunity of witnessing them." In a few days I was able to go out. My first visit was to the grave of my shipmate David, which had been prepared by the kindness of the prince. It was hewn in the solid rock and surrounded with a railing. At the head was a plain slab of stone, on which had been engraved by one of the workers under John's directions this simple inscription: "To the memory of David Roberts, first mate of the ship Albatross, aged 30 years, the first discoverer of the Antarctic Polar Sea." "We tried hard to save your brave shipmate," said ltfr, "but Heaven willed it otherwise." And as I knelt by the grave of my departed comrade, tears came to my eyes at the sad thought that, on this cold and barren isle, in this unknown sea, far from home and kindred, poor David's mortal remains had found their last resting place, with no green sod nor tender leaf to deck his lonely tomb. We had been provided with new clothing, made after the pattern of our old suits. The material was a peculiar variety of wool, finer than any cloth made in our factories. The undergarments were softer than silk and woven without seam. The boots and shoes were made of some unknown material, finer and stronger than our best leather. The caps were like those worn by naval officers and sailors. We took frequent walks over the island. With nautical instruments, I found its position, 82 degrees 45 south, latitude by 150 degrees west long, or about 500 miles from the pole. It is about 3 miles long by a mile wide of igneous rock, being one of the small group communicating with the southern shore of the so-called Antarctic continent, but which consists of several large islands or continents surrounding the pole and separating from each other by great bays or inlets, more or less filled up with ice. The air is pure and bracing, the temperature from 50 degrees to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Storms and cold winds occasionally visit us, but they are always from the north. The winds from the south, strange as it may seem, are generally warm and pleasant. The island is barren and destitute of vegetation, except moss and lichen, such as are indigenous to polar regions, and it is a great resort for seagulls, penguins, etc., who build their nests among the rocks. The water abounds with fish. Our house is large and commodious, built of the same rock, 1 story high, with a roof and roofed with a metal resembling copper. No wood of any kind enters into its construction. It is warmed by a singularly constructed electrical apparatus and steam. The culinary operations are conducted by the same method, and the kitchen utensils are of are of some unknown metal. It is occupied by the superintendent in charge of the island, and the servants, men of dark red or bluish complexions. 2 other houses nearby are occupied by workmen. On the north shore is a ship house, machine shop, and stone pier. Our diet is simple and nutritious, consisting of fish and other articles before described, which are evidently brought from a distance, but there is no meat, fowl, or game of any kind. The prince remained with us several days. One evening he announced he should depart early the following morning. In the meantime, he would leave us in charge of the doctor and the superintendent until his return. His departure was mysterious. Whither he went, or how he was conveyed over this polar ocean, I was not informed, and politeness forbade me to inquire. Time passed on. It was now the close of February. The sun was gradually descending towards the horizon. The Antarctic summer was passing away, and soon the long night of the polar winter would begin her dark reign. In the meantime, I had applied myself diligently to the study of this remarkable language, which is totally different from its alphabet and grammatical construction from any other known on earth, and I was astonished to find that, in respect to majesty and power, beauty and harmony, elegance and precision, it surpassed all other languages, ancient and modern. In this I was greatly aided by Asclepion, and was soon able to dispense with his clairvoyant translations. John also made good progress. The books furnished for the purpose were elegantly bound, the paper imprint surpassing anything of the kind I had ever before seen. Asclepion took his departure early one morning towards the mysterious south. Hypnotos had departed with the prince. The mystery surrounding this remarkable people continually deepens in my mind. Their peculiar physical appearance, so different from all that of the other races on earth, their red, yellow, and blue complexions, their high civilization and knowledge of science, their cultivated manners, mild and gentle in demeanor, this youthful prince with his noble countenance, splendid physique, manly bearing, and polished manners, and presenting in his ensemble so striking a contrast with the pampered scions of royalty who inherit the divine right and tainted blood of their ancestors, many of whom spend their lives in frivolity and pleasure amidst the luxuries and corruptions of the European courts. Oft the delirious song of my poor shipmate in the ice dungeon comes to my mind, and that song indeed seems prophetic realization of what now transpires around me. Oft I ask myself the question, who are these mysterious people? Whence they came? Where is their country? Shut up within these narrow confines, separated by the tremendous barriers from the great world beyond. Is their country at the center of the pole, only 500 miles distant? If so, it cannot be larger than the states of New York and Pennsylvania. And their climate? According to all known climatological laws, the Antarctic pole is certainly the coldest spot on Earth, a region of utter desolation, and its confines uninhabited by man or beast. I often ask the doctor to explain these paradoxes, and also the geographical situation of his country, wherever it might be, and oft received his courteous though evasive reply, "Be patient, my friend." When the proper time comes, all these seeming mysteries shall be explained to you. It was now the 21st of March, the autumnal equinox of the Antarctic. The sun had disappeared below the horizon. Summer was gone, and the long polar winter was at hand. The workshops were closed. The workmen had departed. The superintendent and a few servants only remained. The circumpolar constellations, Centaur, Argo, and Southern Cross, with many others not visible in the northern hemisphere, now shone in full effulgence, giving the heavens an incomparable splendor, while the full moon, circling around the horizon for 10 days every month, shines in this clear atmosphere with a brilliancy unknown in other parts of the world. The heavens are often illuminated by the aurora australis, which in vastness and splendor wholly surpasses those of the northern polar regions. As the period of our departure from this island draws near, said Dr. Hamoval, it is necessary for you to go through the preliminary acclimatization process in order to be prepared for our climate. Is your climate different from this? I asked. Its atmosphere is quite different in many respects. It contains certain elements and forces not existing here. It also contains a larger proportion of oxygen. What? I exclaimed. Do you mean to say that the atmosphere of your country is so chemically different from the great aerial envelope surrounding the globe? So much that it would be highly dangerous for you to be transferred to my country without previous preparation. For a moment I was almost stupefied, said I. What mystery is this? In the name of heaven, where is your country that has such an atmosphere as you describe? Some distance from here, as I have oft told you. Its character and appearance are quite different from yours. At this extraordinary announcement, a feeling of apprehension and almost of fear came over me. The atmosphere of these regions, continued he, lacks many qualities of our native air, and although we have become more or less acclimatized to it, still it is enervating and depressing to our people. I shall have prepared for you an artificial atmosphere corresponding with our own. You must take daily inhalations so that you may gradually become accustomed to it. Then you can visit my country with safety. The doctor prepared a generator and a reservoir in the house charged with chemically prepared air. John and I were provided with respirators and took daily inhalations. The effect was at first quite stimulating, not at all resembling, however, that of oxygen, nitrous oxide, or any other exciting gases. Finally, that effect passed off and was succeeded by more agreeable sensations. What chemical influence it had, if any, on the blood or vital processes, I cannot say, but it certainly produced a greater activity of the bodily and mentally functions, and with increased physical vigor and powers of endurance. One day, while we were industriously pulling at our respirators, John said, "Captain, where do you think these queer folk live?" "That's a very thing that puzzles me. They don't live anywhere on earth outside the pole. They cannot live at the pole, for their summer is not warm enough to grow a single blade of grass, and their winter is 6 months' night, with freezing tempests of snow and sleet. They cannot live in the clouds, nor not on the moon. Consequently, I see no other inhabitation for them except down in the interior of the earth." And in support of this opinion, I announced that they might be elbow cousins to Bolivar's Vilra, or an evolution from Verne's center-earth anthropod apes, or astronomer Halley's hollow globe denizens, or lineal descendants of the chained titans under Mount Etna. "Hi, Captain, if these folks live down there, how do they get outside?" "Through a great opening at the pole, according to the theory of Captain Seames. They creep in and out like flies from a bunghole of an empty beer barrel?" That's the only way they can get in and out. "Captain, be these folks going to take you and me home with them?" "Highly probable. We're getting ready for the transfer. Me no want to go down there. No let you go, if you can help me with it." "Why not? Devils, witches, and bad people live down there." They can't be bad people. They're so kind and generous. They can't be witches because they don't ride on broomsticks. As for devils, they are altogether too fine-looking, well-bred, gentlemanly. Hi, Captain Fred, you don't know what sort of cunning devils of all that." I was constrained to admit that the forces of John's argument, and that the horned and tailed gentry might find their compeers even in polite society. After several days, the doctor, having made a careful physical examination of our lung capacity, respiration, circulation, etc., announced that we were sufficiently acclimatized and could pass muster and were ready for transfer. "I am rejoiced to hear it," said I. "These regions are gloomy enough, and the sooner we're off the better." "Humph," John muttered. "If old yellow-faced doctor reckoned me and Captain Fred are going with him down a big hole underground, where bad peoples and devils live, he much mistaken, by jingo."